Hey, everybody. Welcome to Friday Night Live of What's on My Mind. And I've kind of been saving this one up for you. To be honest with you, this is one that I've had pent up for probably the better part of a decade. And I thought I would kind of let the show get going here, kind of get my comfort level. And, just, I'm just going to spring it on you. Like point blank, if you are easily offended or, sensitive to being told the truth about something. If you're someone who likes to take the low hanging fruit, I don't know, I don't know if there's a better way to put it, but basically what I'm about to do for all of you guys out there that think that there's simple solutions to wildlife management, I'm about to shit in your Wheaties and I'm gonna piss you off. Okay. So try not to get your feelings hurt and leave me a whole bunch of crappy comments. But I do want to know what you think about this. Just wait until I'm done explaining it before you leave your comments, and then I'll respond to them one at a time. All right. So the first thing I want to do right off the bat is say we're going to talk about wolves first in the first part, and then I'm going to transition into the status of mule deer and what's happening with mule deer across the West. And I'm going to probably use like Wyoming as like my primary state because it seems to be like one of the more iconic mule deer states. So let's talk about wolves first. I want to be very clear on one thing. Uh, I am not I'm not a big fan of wolves. Okay. The people that know me know that I'm just a realist. Okay. And wolves are reintroduced to the landscape. We're stuck with them. When people say, oh, we're going to eradicate them, I put them out of my mind. I mean, that's just dumb thinking. We're never going to be allowed to eradicate them again. And number two, unless we do what we did in the 40s and poison them all, hunters today just couldn't keep up with the wolves and kill them all. There's no chance. Um, but once again, we have wolves on the landscape. I'm not a big fan of them, but I'm realist. I know that we're stuck with them. And before I start telling you the facts and giving you some statistics, I just want to get it clear that I'm not a fan of wolves. I'm not a wolf lover, but I'm a wolf realist. Okay. And my favorite topic when I talk about what's real with wolves and wildlife today is the Yellowstone elk herd. Okay. That's where wolves were reintroduced. Okay. And I've spoke to a lot of outfitters, and I know some outfitters that were active in that region of Wyoming back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I mean, I know some of the old timers had great conversations with them. And when we have these talks, it usually starts with, their anger. And then they're like, oh yeah, it wasn't that bad. So look, from 1930, these are statistics I pulled today. I wanted to be as specific as I could. And know this, there's different reports, and the numbers I'm going to give you are somewhat generalized, but they're pretty accurate. From 1930 to 1960. So that's a pretty good span of time, right? There were anywhere from 6,000 to 12,000 animals in that Yellowstone elk herd. Okay. And this is the Wyoming side. In 1968 and 1969, there were fewer than 4,000 elk in the Yellowstone herd that were counted. Okay. No joke. Fewer than 4,000 animals. That's the bottom arrow, where the graph comes down. That's a bottom arrow. Okay. Then the elk population started to rebound. Um, by 1987 and 1988, there was 23,000 elk in the population, and it remained at around 20,000 or more animals through a good portion of the early 90s. And one of the things that we have to remember is that in 1988, no joke, I wanted to get the dates on this, from June 14th to November 18th, 1988, that Yellowstone fire, the famous fire burned, right? And almost 800,000 acres inside Yellowstone National Park burned, and 1.2 million acres total, and call it the greater Yellowstone area burned. All right. Now, a lot of that was up in the mountains, right? And that is your late spring through summer and fall range for elk. And the carrying capacity of that land went up, and the elk population started to tick up. And the wildlife biologists in Wyoming, they're pretty smart. I know a number of them, and they're real smart, and they're pro hunting. Okay. And they realized very quickly that if that elk population kept going up 25, 30,000 animals, that was going to be too many elk flooding down onto the Jackson Hole wildlife refuge in the wintertime. And that, if you know anything about winter range is fragile. Okay. And if it gets overgrazed and destroyed, then you have a problem. Okay. The problem you're going to have is that they're going to graze it into the dirt. And it's going to take years, maybe decades, for that bitter brush and all of those uh, shrubs and browse to come back. Yeah, you can get the green up, let's say the grass back, but the really, you know, uh, tall above the snow line winter range browse was going to be destroyed. Now I know this because in the early 1990s, a friend of mine drew that elk tag for Jackson Hole. And I went down, I got to see the elk migration, man. He had this wonderful tag and we went and checked in for his hunt. And they actually said, "Hey, we're trying to reduce the elk population. Do you want some cow tags?" I could get, I can't remember now, it was 2 or 3 cow tags. I mean, they offered me cow tags for like nothing. It was super cheap. And I said, "No, we're just here to kill a big bull." And they said, "Yeah, but we need to kill some elk." And I remember that biologist telling me we need to kill some elk. And at the time I was saying, "Why do we need to kill some elk? We should have more elk. Let's get 1,000,000 elk out here on the landscape. More, more, more." And they told us they were having trouble getting people to kill cow elk. Well, sure enough, you get to 1995 and that elk population is still ticking up, ticking up. They're in danger of getting way too many elk on the landscape. Well, that was just the ammunition that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service needed to cave into the landscapes from like the defenders of wildlife and everything else, and and justify bringing wolves back onto that landscape that they needed to greatly reduce that elk population back to its traditional populations so that they didn't destroy the winter range. And let me tell you something. If you think wolves are a wrecking ball on elk herd, destroy the ecosystem, especially the winter range, and watch famine and malnutrition rip through an elk herd like it did the caribou herds in the Arctic of Canada, and watch 20,000 elk become 2,000 elk in 2 winters. I mean, famine, malnutrition, and just starvation. You're talking about something that is far more cruel than you could ever believe. And it would just take out massive numbers of elk. And then it would take decades for that winter range to recover. Once again, I'm not justifying for myself why the wolves were introduced. I'm telling you that that was a contributing factor, that because hunters didn't take the cow tags and didn't push to reduce those elk populations more, we just gave them justification. Now, obviously, that was pretty rough on the Yellowstone elk herd. It was back down, by 2013, it was back down to the same population it was at in 68, 69. And it was back down under 4,000 animals again. No reason to panic. It's been there before. You know, what's the difference between 2013 and in 1968? Well, same population. Now it's started to creep back up. I checked again today. As of a couple of years ago, the elk population was back up to between 6 and 7,000 animals. And that's back into that range of elk population from 1930 to 1960, which was 6,000 to 12,000 animals. And it seems like it's on like a little uptick at the moment. It's probably doing a little bit of this, and hopefully we'll get it back up into that, like, 8, 9,000, 10,000 animal range. And then the biologists can, hopefully convince hunters that before it takes off again, that they'll, you know, be able to shoot some cows and manage the population. Additionally, you got to remember that as your ungulate population goes up, ungulates being elk and deer and bison, as their populations go up, your predator numbers go up, whether it's mountain lions, wolves, coyotes, their populations go up, and typically they'll keep things in check as well. But that's why we have the wolf issue that we have today. I really believe, though, that they would have found a way to get wolves back in the landscape. I think they would have sued and sued and sued until they won. But you have to understand that elk are a very hardy species. They will adapt. And obviously, even with all those wolves on the Yellowstone landscape, their population has gone from as few as 3 or 4,000 animals back up to 6, and maybe even 7,000 animals. And it's probably just a matter of time before we see that population keep creeping up. We have a number of hunters that go into the field in that western Wyoming region. It is wolf range, but you know what? We're having some amazing hunting seasons. I mean, some of our happiest elk hunters are the guys who are coming out of western Wyoming, backcountry horseback elk hunts, killing lots of bulls. Travis has done that hunt a few times. It's amazing experience. And I don't want people to think that because there's wolves on the landscape in Wyoming that all the elk are gone. There's lots of elk. As a matter of fact, that's going to transition into the other part of my conversation, which, I'm about to talk about Wyoming mule deer. And you can't talk about Wyoming mule deer without talking about Wyoming elk. Okay. So let's start with Wyoming mule deer. And before I do this, I want to know your thoughts on wolves, and don't just make comments like until all the wolves are dead, we're not going to use common sense. Okay. I want you to think about your comment first and give me an honest thought about how you feel like, you know, the elk populations are doing maybe in your home state or the places where you like to hunt. Maybe you've seen them impact, that the animals in your region. Like I said, I'd love some good civil dialogue on that. All right, so transitioning to Wyoming mule deer. Just some stats I pulled. In 1980, it was estimated there were 578,000 mule deer, just mule deer in the state of Wyoming. In 2023, it's estimated there was 216,000 animals left. That's it. Okay. Now, granted, that's coming off of a tough winter, which impacted their numbers a little bit in some of the regions. Not the whole state was bombarded, but that's 362,000 fewer mule deer. All right. Now, why the decline? All right. And no, it's not wolves. All right. I'm going to straight up tell you right now, it's not wolves because mule deer populations have been plummeting since before wolves land on the landscape. And their populations in parts of the state where there are either no wolves or very few wolves or just transient wolves that move through, wolves are not the reason mule deer populations are plummeting in Wyoming. And they have mountain lion hunts and pretty good quotas. And I mean, it has far more to do than predation. Okay. And in talking to people who are truly wildlife, experts and mule deer, people who've studied mule deer over the years, it seems to me that mule deer have four enemies. Okay. They're whitetails. Whitetails are a big enemy of mule deer. All right. Those mule deer bucks will dog or whitetail bucks will dog a whitetail doe plumb out of the country. And if all the mule deer does are gone, the bucks leave. Okay. Whitetails displace mule deer and they displace them to lower quality habitat and range. All right. Number two, elk are an enemy of mule deer. And I'll cover that in just a second. But as elk populations across the West have gone up and way up, mule deer populations have dropped. And we've watched that on the private ranches that we have personally, literally watched as elk come in and compete with mule deer on the landscape, the mule deer leave. I personally feel like we have too many elk in a lot of places. I mean, I think a place like a dozen places off the top of my head where I used to be able to go find 50 to 100 mule deer a day. And now I can go out and find 50 to 100 elk in a day and I might see 2 or 3 mule deer. Elk displace mule deer. They just do. Mule deer are fragile. They do not compete. They will leave. And here's the big one. Now, this is one that is going to light some ranchers and specifically the cattle people on fire, but the studies that we're seeing right now from the private land side, uh, cattle grazing and sheep grazing displace mule deer as well. And yeah, you can go out there and you can find them, mule deer on the range with cattle, but not like you used to. And I'll get into that some more. Once again, I've got some statistics here that back this up. And we have we have a big population in the United States. I'm not against beef. Good Lord, I love a good beef steak. But I think we have to be wise about how we graze our wildlife landscapes. The fourth enemy is man. And not because we're out there hunting them and killing them. Okay. Development and human encroachment, we take away their habitat. A prime example is right where I'm sitting right now. Literally, I contributed to the problem. I built the Steve's Outdoor Adventures headquarters, the studio, the shop, the offices, everything right in mule deer winter range. There's mule deer that walk right behind the shop in the middle of the night. They don't like to be out there during the day when we're there, but I've seen them out back lots. I mean, you see a lot of mule deer right here in town. They don't like to be here, but we built our towns all across the West on mule deer habitat, specifically winter range. That hurts them. And there'll be people say, "Oh, they live in my yard just fine. They eat the roses, no problem." Yeah, well, it's not good for them. All right. There's far fewer deer today than there was 100 years ago. Man and our development and encroachment is a big problem. So this is where I start maybe hurting some feelings. And that is, as hunters, and like I said, I contributed to this problem when I was out, on the Yellowstone landscape back in the early 90s. We're just ignorant. I mean, honestly, we want it all. We can't have a million elk and a million deer, and we can't have all the cattle, and we can't put all the sheep out there, and we can't just destroy the habitat and develop on their landscape and expect everything to just be there for us because we donate millions of dollars to the Mule Deer Foundation or the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation or whatever it might be. Elk are going to be more hardy. Whitetail are going to be more hardy. They're going to survive, but mule deer are going to be displaced. And if we don't do something soon, we're going to watch the next 100 years go by and the mule deer population just disappear. It's going to get to where their numbers are so low, there'll never be a hunting season for them, and they're just never going to recover. But here's where I'm against some statistics. Once again, I'm going to use Wyoming. Okay. In 1980, the estimated statewide elk population is 1980. Wyoming statewide elk population was estimated at 65,000 animals. Okay. In 2023, it's estimated that there were 110,000 animals. That's a bunch. Okay. That's a lot of elk. That's almost double the elk population. During that same period of time, mule deer populations plummeted from 578,000 animals to 216,000 animals. So if the mule deer population fell by more than half and the elk population more than doubled or close to more than doubled, one has to do with the other. All right. I mean, that's just basic common sense that one has something to do with the other. All right. Let's talk about cattle. And once again, I love a beefsteak. We graze our mountain properties. And just so that I put my money where my mouth is, we're phasing out the cattle graze on our mountain property so that we're working toward mule deer, recovery. I wish they would give me just unlimited cow elk tags. I would pound the elk populations on the ranch. I'd shoot them out of there, not all the way out, but I would reduce their elk population if I could. But let's talk about the cattle. Okay, and once again, it's just Wyoming. Over the last century, cattle grazing has more than doubled in the state of Wyoming. The number of cattle. Okay, as of January 2025, it's estimated that approximately 1.2 million cattle and calves are on the landscape in Wyoming, including over 6,500 beef cattle. Okay. Or 650,000 beef cattle. So it's like half that number of beef cattle. 1.2 million animals. Okay. Once again, in the last century, mule deer populations have dropped by more than half. Elk populations have almost doubled, and cattle grazing on the landscape has doubled. Cattle are going up in numbers. Elk are going up in numbers. And get this, mule deer or whitetail populations have more than doubled. But mule deer, more than half. Those are the enemies, right? Human encroachment and development. I don't even know if there's a metric on that. Everywhere you go, there's sprawl out into the foothills. And I feel real strongly about this. I feel like the wildlife biologists, as good as they are and as intelligent as they are, they're scared to death to come out and say these things. I think they really need to come out and have that harsh conversation about, hey guys, you can't have 110,000 elk in Wyoming. Why? Well, number one, they can sell an elk tag in Wyoming now to a non-resident in the special pool for, I want to say it's like $2,000. It's twice the value of the special mule deer tag. Okay. Elk have twice the license value. They're hardier animals. It's easier for them to manage for lots of elk. All right. That's one reason. Number two, I think they're scared to death to make the hunters upset at them. I think that as hunters, we are far too harsh on the biologists because they have a damned hard job. All right. We want to blame, oh, I didn't get my tag and they put wolves on the landscape. Our wildlife biologists, most of them had nothing to do with wolves being put back on the landscape in any of the Western states. If you want to be mad at somebody, be mad at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the crappy lawmakers and judges and leadership in the states that reintroduced them, and at least embrace the fact that Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana have hunting seasons and they can shoot some wolves and manage the wolf populations. But the biologists as a whole are afraid of making hunters upset. They're afraid of losing licensing revenue that pays for running state wildlife agencies. They don't run themselves. They're funded through license and tag sales. Okay. And number two, I think they're downright scared to death to pick a fight with ranchers and cattlemen's associations and cattle producers because that's a big lobby. I know that I'm going to catch a little bit of hate for what I'm doing right now. I'm saying this out loud that cattle are one of the enemies of mule deer, and we should think about reducing their graze on the landscape. Where do we graze the cattle at that point? I don't know. I'm not out to offer a solution there. I'm offering a solution for mule deer. Let's pull the cattle graze back off the landscape, a good portion. I'm not saying reduce it entirely. And the narrative that grazing cattle is the best solution for reducing fuel for forest fire. It's one of many tools. We've become very fire intolerant. Okay. We need to become, I guess, fire understanding. I think that we have suppressed fire so well for the last 75 years that we now have forests that need to burn. And then when they burn hot and big. And we're seeing it across the West every year. So putting cattle out on the landscape to munch the grass down would not be required if we were more fire tolerant and we did more prescribed burning to reduce those fuels. And we were, let's say, out in front of the curve when it came to that. Um, it's a complex topic. It really is. And for me, I feel like look, I love mule deer. I want to see big mule deer and lots of mule deer on the landscape someday. But unless we come together as sportsmen and start having these conversations and then actually acting on them, we're never going to get our mule deer back to where they were in 1980. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. It's damn possible to do it. We have to reverse the things that we've been doing for so long. We got to quit being bullheaded and stubborn and greedy. The other thing I'd love to see is I'd love to see the Mule Deer Foundation get more active in trying to secure conservation easements donated to them. Mule deer need conservation easements more than elk ever did. We need millions of acres put into conservation easements. And if you're a landowner and you're listening to this and you've got land that is, wildlife habitat, whether it's timber ground or whatever, consider putting it in a conservation easement and taking the massive tax credit. And you might not ever pay taxes again the rest of your life at the federal level if you donate something like this. And what it does is that you donate a conservation easement. Let's say your property is worth $10 million, the way it sits. But if you put a conservation easement out that says you can't have wind power and you can't have power lines going through it and you can't subdivide it for, housing and whatnot or commercial development or anything, you just put it into where it can't be developed. You can still log it and manage it and everything else, but put a conservation easement on it that eliminates development. And then it gets appraised and it's much lower in value at that point. Well, you get the tax credit between the two values and you get to use that over decades. It's a serious financial benefit for the right person. And it's a massive benefit for wildlife, and mule deer in particular need this very badly. The other thing we need to be doing as landowners and stewards of the land is we need to be doing more with regard to conservation projects, prescribe burns, plant some shrubs, do some thinning projects on the mountain, open up those timber stands so that the animals can browse in there. There's a lot of things that we can do as landowners to enhance the ground. If I'm a public land hunter, I am all over my ranger districts, and I mean all over my ranger districts, with all my friends and everything, to get the cattle graze pulled off or significantly reduced. I would be all over them for prescribed burns, some logging projects, things that open up the ground. Wildlife thrive around like places that have been thinned and logged out, because that's where you get fresh, green up and lots of feed. There's a lot of feed there. So, there, like I said, there's things we can do to bring the range back into condition that'd be friendly to mule deer. Like I said, I doubt it's going to happen. I feel like and the other thing you got to remember is this: just because you pull all that stuff off doesn't mean tomorrow all the deer back. It's going to take 10 or 20 years to start to see a good uptick. Things happen slowly. And that's why I say, I doubt that we're going to ever do it. I know that some of us are going to do it on small individual basis, but as a whole, I feel like it's not going to happen because we're too greedy. Man is too greedy. We're too impatient. And because of that, I feel like mule deer are truly never going to rebound. But all of that said, once again, all of that said, there's still some places with some incredible mule deer hunting. And so this is the light at the end of the tunnel for some of us in the short term. There are big private lands hunting opportunities in Wyoming and Colorado that we know of, where they've pulled the cattle grazing for a long time now. They've kept the elk out for the most part, and they've been managing for big deer again, and they're producing some big deer. Like I said, Wyoming, Colorado in particular. South Dakota is another area where we know some landowners that have made massive improvements in their wildlife management and habitat. And then there's the areas of Alberta, Canada, out in the prairie country that are looking doggone good. I mean, they look real good. And I feel like, there's still some really strong locations to go hunt for big deer, and there's always going to be monster bucks. Like, you've got the big deer that like Doyle Moss kills on Antelope Island in Utah. And for $500,000, you can hunt Antelope Island too. There's still the Henry Mountains area, well managed for big deer. Those are limited entry tags that you can draw or, buy a conservation tag at auction for. There's definitely places that you can go hunt for big deer, but I worry that those opportunities are wanting. I feel like that they're starting to become fewer and fewer. Every year we lose a little bit more. And that winter a couple of years ago that hit western Wyoming and Utah, parts of all that northwest Colorado region, man, the mule deer just got bombed. It was bad. So look, like I said, I want your comments. I want to hear from everybody. I love the fact that y'all take a minute to sit down and listen to me ramble about this crap that's on my mind. But I'll be back next week. I'll be back with some more of this, what's on my mind, but I'll look for your comments and I'll respond to each and every one of you as we go. So until then, you'll have a great weekend and we'll talk to you again soon. If you've liked listening to What's on My Mind, remember to give this video a like and either follow or subscribe to this page so that you never miss a single live episode when we stream them from right here in our studio. And don't forget to drop a comment below. I want to know what's on your mind.